Hi guys, it's Sean here from DigiDirect. Now today we're going to be taking a look at a Panasonic compact camera, and that's the LX10. Now this is also known as the LX15 in different markets. Now the Panasonic LX10 is a compact camera, so it's a small body size, a non-interchangeable lens, but it has a much larger sensor than most compacts. It has a 1-inch size sensor, which means the LX10 is going to have higher picture quality, better low light performance, and a better shallow depth of field than most compact cameras. There are other cameras that are in this kind of small form factor with a 1-inch sensor. Notably, there's the Sony RX100 Mark V, also the Panasonic's TZ110, which they came out about 10 months ago. I'm going to be making a lot of comparisons between the LX10 and those other two cameras. Note the TZ110, by the way, is also known as the ZS100 or the TZ100, depending on what market you're in. I'm going to call it the TZ110 because we're in Australia, but we're all talking about the same camera here. But I'm going to compare the LX10 to these other cameras. When we compare it to the TZ110, we'll see that there are a lot of similarities between the two cameras. There's one or two key differences, which are going to be kind of the deciding factor on whether you want the LX10 or the TZ110, depending on what features are more important to you as a user. When we compare it to the RX100 Mark V, we're going to see that the RX100 Mark V is definitely still the highest performing compact camera in this category. The LX10 is not going to significantly challenge it here spec-wise, but we'll see that the LX10 is still very respectable in terms of these kinds of specs. It still does quite a good job, and it's significantly cheaper than the RX100 Mark V. And by significantly cheaper, I mean to the tune of about $600 Australian, so quite a large dollar value. So keep that in mind as we go through these specs. Now, if you're not too familiar with the TZ110 or the RX100 Mark V, I've got video reviews on those there. You can check them out. I'll put them in the description as well. But let's start with a look at the body of the LX10. So the body design of the LX10 is very similar to the TZ110 that we're making some comparisons to. It's got that similar kind of smooth body design look. Obviously, being a compact camera, it is quite small and pocketable. It's got that extendable lens that will fold away when you're not using it, which is nice. One nice point is this nice manual aperture control ring that you'll see here. If you like manual controls on your camera, that's nice to have. The TZ110 does not have this, so that's an extra little manual control that we have on the LX10. In addition to that aperture ring, we also have this ring at the front, which can control a variety of settings, such as zoom control or manual focus, for example. On the back, we have a nice LCD touchscreen. And touch controls are implemented, as we've seen again on Panasonic cameras in the past, which means they're very well implemented. Panasonic has been doing good touchscreens for quite a while now, so they're pretty intuitive. It's quick to jump around through the touchscreen. You can use it to change your autofocus point, which is handy, drag little icons like histograms around the screen. It's a pretty good system. Now, it's notable here because the Sony RX100 Mark V does not have a touchscreen. Another nice feature on this screen is that it is a tilting screen. We can flip it upwards and all the way around for selfies, which is going to be good for if you're taking photos of yourself or vlogging, for example. You can see it also kicks into its face recognition when we flip it around here, so it's going to be easy to track your face and keep it in focus. That's nice to have. The TZ110 does not have a tilting screen. It's a fixed screen, so that's an advantage that you're going to have if you get the LX10 over the TZ110. As usual, Panasonic has given us a number of assignable function buttons. We have 3 here on the LX10. We can assign these to whatever setting we want, really, so they're really customizable, which is really nice. There's also 5 touchscreen buttons that you can assign, so you can kind of have a hot list that you can access via the touchscreen, in addition to the actual physical buttons on the side as well. Similarly, we do have 1 customizable control setting on the mode dial here. We can set your settings to whatever you like there, and every time you put it back to the C there, it'll recall those settings immediately, which is nice to have. I use that all the time on my GH4. We also have a little pop-up flash here in the corner, which is nice. But one thing that is notably absent is a viewfinder. So both the TZ110 and the RX100 Mark V do have viewfinders. You're not going to find that on the LX10, so bear that in mind if that's an important feature for you. So touching on the sensor that's inside the body there, it has a 20 megapixel 1-inch size sensor. That's about par for the course when comparing it to the RX100 Mark V and the TZ110. They both have 20 megapixel 1-inch size sensors. But compared to other compacts, that means the LX10 is going to give you reasonably high resolution, high quality images. The size of the sensor means that it's going to be quite good in low light, good for shallow depth of field, and just overall higher image quality than most other compacts. The fact that it's 20 megapixel means that you're going to be able to blow your photos up if you're printing them out to a decent size. You're also going to be able to crop in a decent amount and still have a good amount of detail in there. So you're going to get good picture quality out of the LX10, certainly. So now let's take a look at the lens on the LX10 because that's a definite highlight of this camera. So it has a 24 to 72 millimeter f1.4 to 2.8 lens. So that's, let's look at the focal length first. That's a very usable focal length. That's considered kind of your standard focal length zoom. It's about a 3 times zoom, and it's basically the same as on the RX100 Mark V, which has a 24 to 70 millimeter range lens. It's generally the lens, the focal length that most people take the majority of their shots in. However, it is noticeably not comparable or not the same as the TZ110, which has a very long 24 to 240 millimeter 10 times zoom range. So the TZ110 has a lot longer zoom range than both the LX10 and the RX100 Mark V. That's kind of one of the main headline features on the TZ110, so you're not going to get that on the LX10, but it is still a very workable zoom range. Now we'll see the trade-off there because the LX10, looking at the aperture with a 1.4 to 2.8 aperture lens, is a very bright lens. It's going to let in a lot of light, going to be great for low light shooting, also good for achieving shallow depth of field, which is typically somewhat difficult on a smaller camera like this, but you will be able to get it a little bit with this wide aperture at 1.4. Compared to the TZ110, it's a lot brighter. The TZ110's lens is 2.8 to 5.9, so it's a lot darker of a lens. That's the trade-off you get for having that longer zoom range. The LX10 lens is even a little bit brighter than the lens on the RX100 Mark V, which is 1.8 to 2.8. So at 1.4 to 2.8, the LX10 is a little bit brighter at the wide end, which is nice. Now looking at autofocus, the LX10 has a 49-point contrast detection system using Panasonic depth by defocus technology. This is a system that we've seen in some other Panasonic cameras before. It's reliable, it's a very quick at grabbing focus, very good at tracking focus as well. It's going to give you a good performance in the realm of autofocus, certainly. It also has a good face detect system in there, which is particularly useful considering we have that flip-up selfie screen. Looking at burst shooting, the camera can shoot quite quickly at a max of 10 frames per second or 6 frames per second if you're using autofocus tracking. That is quite fast, so if you're shooting any kind of fast movement, sports, action, or kids running around and so on, you're going to be able to track that pretty well. It doesn't have a huge buffer, so if you're shooting raw, you're only going to be able to shoot at this speed for about a second or so, but you can certainly do it. Now, these specs don't quite match up to the RX100 Mark V, which does have a little bit of a faster autofocus system, and in terms of burst shooting, they kind of went overboard. The RX100 Mark V has 24 frames per second, as well as a huge buffer of 170 JPEG or 60 RAW photos. Now those are huge numbers. You might not find that you need that kind of performance on a regular basis. And the LX10 certainly is still putting up very respectable numbers that for most people will be all that they need. However, that is even mitigated a little bit further by the fact that the LX10 has Panasonic's 4K photo modes and similar, which we'll touch on now. So the LX10 does have those 4K photo modes that we've seen in almost every Panasonic camera in the last year or so. And that is essentially revolving around using 4K video and pulling stills from the video. Because 4K video is a lot higher resolution than 1080, the stills that you pull from it can actually be used as decent photos. They're 8 megapixel photos, so it's still a decent quality. The 4K photo mode, the standard one, basically shoots 4K video at 30 frames per second for up to 15 minutes, and then you go through and pull stills from that. And then the post-focus and focus stacking modes both rely on taking a photo using every single focus point, in this case 49 focus points. In the post-focus mode, you can go in and tap each focus point and change the focus after the fact if you want to change the focus point of the photo. I go into these features a little bit more in depth in my TZ110 review, so watch that if you want a bit more detail on these, but that's essentially how they work. Now lastly, let's touch on video on the LX10, and as I'm sure you could surmise from my last segment there, well, the LX10 can shoot 4K video, and it can shoot it at up to 30 frames per second. Now note that the image stabilization does work while shooting video, which is nice. It'll shoot at 1080p or full HD at up to 120 frames per second as well, which is a cool little bonus. Now you do lose some manual control when you're shooting it that way, but this will let you shoot some nice slow motion footage. Now note the RX100 Mark V does shoot at up to 240 frames per second in 1080. While the LX10 is not quite at the spec level that the RX100 Mark V is, it's still very respectable. 120 frames per second on a compact like this is still quite good. So now that we're familiar with most of the features and specs on the LX10, let's do a summary comparison between that camera and then the TZ110 and the RX100 Mark V. So comparing it to the TZ110, they're both Panasonic cameras. They're very similar in most respects. It's a matter of trade-offs if you're deciding which camera is better for you. The LX10 does not have the super long zoom range that the TZ110 has, so it's not quite as flexible, but it has a much brighter lens, so it's better in low light, better at shallow depth of field shooting. In a similar vein, the LX10 does not have the viewfinder that the TZ110 has, but it gains that tilting LCD screen, which will allow you to do selfies and vlogging and so on. So when deciding between these two cameras, you should look at those features, determine what features are better for you and how you shoot, and that'll kind of guide you as to which camera is better for you between those two. Now looking at the LX10 versus the RX100 Mark V, it's clear that the RX100 is still the undisputed king of the high-performance compact camera. The LX10 can't really knock it off that perch. If you're looking for the best performing compact camera, that's still the RX100 Mark V, certainly. However, I think that the LX10 is a much better value camera than the RX100. It does a lot of similar things to the RX100, maybe not absolutely everything at the same quality, at the same spec level that the RX100 does, but certainly everything at a very respectable level that I think most people will be happy with. And it does it again at a significantly lower price point. Again, here in Australia, we're talking about a $600 difference, so a really significant price difference. One feature that's unavoidable is that lack of viewfinder on the LX10, which you do have on the RX100. So if that is an important feature, keep that in mind. Now, having said all that, let's keep in mind that we are talking about compact cameras here, and that not everybody buying a compact is necessarily going to be super interested in all the nitty-gritty specs that we've just gone through. So in broad terms, the LX10 is a very competent compact camera that's going to be great for someone who wants a small camera that they can bring around, but yet still takes high quality photos, is particularly good in low light with that very bright lens, and is just generally a very good jack of all trades camera that does everything quite well. I certainly think that most people will be very happy with the performance out of the LX10. Now, if you want to learn a bit more about the LX10 or try it out, come into one of our stores. We've got stores in the Sydney CBD, Bondi Junction, Miranda, Chatswood, the Brisbane and Melbourne CBD, and a new store in Cannington, Western Australia, which is just outside of Perth. You can also order the LX10 on our website at www.digidirect.com.au. Thanks guys, take care.